Hello to all the classic people that are returning. I'm glad you're back. I want to welcome any new visitors and let you know that there will be spoilers ahead. Today on Classic Movie Review, we are taking on the film noir The Racket, 1951. IMDb.com rates this movie at a low 6.7. The Racket 1951 was slaughtered on RottenTomatoes.com with 33% on the tomato meter and 44% audience score. Geez, it's not that bad. I'm going to slot this film at 382 on my list of all film noirs. I first saw this movie when I was deep diving into the film noirs of Lizabeth Scott. This movie is loaded with stars of the genre. Although the outcome is predictable, watching these great actors go through their paces is fantastic. This film is a remake of the silent film The Racket 1928. The 1928 film was based on Bartlett Cormac's play of the same name. The play and the earlier film were about a bootlegger, roughly modeled on Chicago gangster Al Capone. Howard Hughes produced The Racket 1928 and owned the studio for The Racket 1951. Two actors from the play got their start in Hollywood as a result. They are Edward G. Robinson and John Cromwell. He was pretty convincing as a criminal left behind by changing times. John Cromwell is the father of James Cromwell, a great actor known for, among other things, playing the drunken Zephram Cochrane in Star Trek First Contact 1996. I want to give a super shout out to Steel City Celtic or Celtic. I think it's Celtic. Thank you very much for your review. It's greatly appreciated. Thanks to Rambling RJ, Todd F., and the others that contacted me. You guys and gals rule. Actors. Robert Mitchum was in the role of Captain Thomas McQueig. He was dapperly dressed and as cool as ever. This great actor was first covered in the great film noir Out of the Past 1947. Lizabeth Scott played the tough torch singer that found her heart of gold, Irene Hayes. She was made for this role with her husky voice and star-eyed optimism. Scott was first covered in the very good film noir The Strange Love of Martha Ivers 1946. Robert Ryan snarled and growled his way through this film as gangster Nick Scanlon. He was pretty convincing as a criminal left behind by changing times. Ryan was first covered in the war flick Battle of the Bulge, 1965. William Talman played the perfect cop and husband, Officer Bob Johnson. I thought he looked a little old to be a rookie cop. However, it was made clear that he was a war veteran, possibly accounting for the extra years. Talman excelled at playing bad guys and was first covered in the film noir Armored Car Robbery, 1950. Ray Collins was almost perfect as a corrupt DA, Mortimer X. Welsh, with the right amount of criminality and fear. Collins was first covered in the fantastic Clark Gable war film Command Decision 1948. William Conrad was the hidden gem of this movie. As corrupt investigator Detective Sergeant Turk, he slunk around in the background before making a pivotal move. Conrad was first covered in the film noir Cry Danger 1951. Milburn Stone showed up as an uncredited member of the investigation team. I'd never seen him in anything besides Gunsmoke. Hey, if you want to support the show, we got merch. We got shirts, cups, stickers, you name it. Follow the link and check it out. Story. In a big city, newspapers are being delivered on the streets. The headline reads that the Crime Commission is meeting with the governor. The citizens seem skeptical. In the meeting, the locals tell the governor that national crime syndicates are moving in and the problem is too big to solve locally. Harry Craig, Les Tremonti, is the lead local investigator. He brings a news item showing that Police Captain Thomas McQueig, Robert Mitchum, has been transferred again. Craig says directly that local officials are helping to promote crime by repeatedly moving a good cop like McQueig. Craig tells about Nick Scanlon, Robert Ryan, the local criminal boss being taken over by a national syndicate. They are not sure who is the head of the National Boys. He is known only as the Old Man. The syndicate already controls the Assistant State's Attorney, Mortimer X. Walsh. Ray Collins. They are using their money to get Mortimer elected to a judgeship. Craig wants to break the case just before the election. In a high-rise in another part of town, torpedoes and hired muscles are waiting in Nick Scanlon's outer room. Nick has sprung Durko, Max Wagner, without syndicate approval. Manic, John Dahum, and another hood are worried because someone has spilled their guts to the crime commission. They expect Nick to blow his top. Nick enters the room and snarls at the hoods before returning inside. Nick is waiting for the barber, Tony, Tito Volo. Manic and the other hood ask Tony to talk with Nick about not going overboard with revenge. Tony tries to talk to Nick, but the gangster Nick sees right through the ploy. Nick knows that Manic is behind the talk. Nick forces Manic to tell him about the trouble. Nick thinks the old man is too easy on people and doesn't use enough violence. Greg returns to his office and is greeted by his staff, including a very young Milburn Stone. They think that we'll get convictions based on the stool pigeon, Roy Higgins, Howland Chamberlain. They expect Higgins to return for more interrogation. The staff tells that Higgins is part of the Acme Real Estate Company. At the office of Acme Real Estate Company, R.G. Connolly, Don Porter, and Davis, Ralph Peters, are discussing the election of friendly Judge Mortimer. Higgins arrives at the office and demands to see the old man because he was promised the judgeship. Connolly says the boss is not in, and Higgins says he is done with the rackets. Connolly gives Higgins a confession to sign. The weak Higgins signs the document. Higgins runs into Nick coming out of the elevator. Nick lets Higgins leave. Nick meets with Connolly and says the confession will do no good and they have to act against a man who will squeal. Nick wants to do things the old way and is unhappy with the new leadership. Connolly says there are ways to get stuff done without killing. Nick points out the window and shows that Higgins has been shot dead in the parking lot. Durko and another hood quickly leave the parking lot in their car. They almost hit some pedestrians in a crosswalk. A beat cop, Officer Bob Johnson, William Talman, asks why they are in such a hurry. He lets him leave, but he is very suspicious. It is not long before Johnson hears about the murder. Johnson goes to the police station and pores over the mug books until he identifies Durko. Johnson has a warrant issued for Durko. Back at Acme, Connolly is reading the riot act to crooked police detective Sergeant Turk, William Conrad. Turk is showing Johnson's report on Durko. Turk is an investigator for the state's attorney's special investigation department. Since Officer Johnson is in McQueig's precinct, Connolly doesn't know what can be done. Turk wants violent action. Connolly tosses the problem back to Turk to handle. The officers of McQueig's precinct gather for roll call. They have mixed opinions about their new captain. McQueig conducts an inspection of the men. He says their job is to protect the public and he will not put up with any corruption.
You see a man breaking the law, arrest him. I don't care who he is or what influence he's got. I'll take the responsibility.
Afterwards, McQueig compliments Johnson on his excellent work identifying Durko. Turk arrives at the 7th precinct to talk to McQueig. Turk asks about Johnson and is told he is solid and honest. Johnson is brought in and Turk gives him the once-over. McQueig gives Turk the boot, and Johnson knows someone is covering up for the criminals. McQueig places Johnson on a special assignment. Johnson is happily married to Lucy Johnson, Virginia Houston. Johnson talks about his work, and Lucy wonders if her husband's work is worth the effort. Johnson is driven and plans to go back to work that night. Lucy announces she is pregnant. Johnson is doomed in this movie. McQueig shows up at Nick's apartment. The hoods in the lobby are shocked by the police captain's presence. McQueig walks into Nick's room. They are on a first-name basis from the old days. Nick denies being involved in the killing of Higgins. McQueig gets tough on Nick, and Nick stands up to the cop. McQueig goes over all the times that Nick has messed with his career. He says from now on, it's personal. Nick implies that he can bribe McQueig. They hear a female raising her voice and fighting with a man outside the door. She bursts into Nick's room. She says her name is Irene Hayes, Lizabeth Scott, and she just broke up with her fiancé. Under questioning, she says she is a singer at the Paradise Club. Nick calls Joe Scanlon, Brett King, into his room. Nick chews out his brother for getting engaged to a cheap canary, as he calls her. Joe does not defend Irene. Nick says she can keep the ring, but needs to let his brother go. Irene storms out, and Nick slaps his brother around. After the humiliation of his fiancée and the beating, Joe stands up to his brother and says he will marry Irene. McQueig watches the family fight with joy. When Joe leaves, Nick complains about all the money and effort he has poured into his brother. This includes buying college degrees. Nick gets mad at McQueig's grin and offers to bribe him again. McQueig leaves. At home, Mary McQueig, Joyce McKenzie, tries to keep her husband from returning to work late at night. McQueig tells Mary that he has to watch for shenanigans as it is near the election. McQueig walks out to his car and a bomb explodes under his porch. A car speeds away that seems to contain some of Nick's hoods. McQueig is okay, and Mary has been knocked down. She takes it like a trooper. Police surround the house and get a line on a suspicious car. McQueen gets into a police car and they go to where the two hoods crashed their car. An officer on the scene says he recognized them as Nick's men. The criminals are inside a parking garage. There is one cop inside the garage already. McQueen takes the lead, and shortly they find the police officer wounded but alive. McQueen has a gun battle with one of the hoods as they both head towards the roof. The hood jumps on McQueen, and they both lose their guns. They get into a Donnybrook and roll all over the rooftop. In the fight, the hood loses his footing and falls to his death. McQueen is still not happy because one of the hoods got away. I wonder why none of the other cops came up to help. McQueen kicks in the door of Nick's place. He knocks the butler to the floor and demands to know where Nick is. McQueen sees the picture of Joe and takes it with him. Ah, the good old days, living in the land, sans the Fourth Amendment. McQueen arrives at the precinct and is beset by reporters wanting info on the bombing. Attorney Mortimer X. Welsh is waiting in McQueen's office. He states that he is outraged about the bombing. McQueen tells Welsh that the old man knows where Nick is and that he should ask. McQueen tries to talk Welsh into going straight. Welsh comes back that the old man is making him a judge. McQueen answers that if he convicted Nick, Welsh could be governor. Welsh says no way. After the judge leaves, McQueen sends Johnson to the Paradise Club to arrest Joe. He says to charge Joe with vagrancy or expectorating on the public pavement. Johnson wants to know if the same applies for spitting teeth on the sidewalk. Nick finds out from the butler that Joe has gone to the club. He also tells that McQueen roughed him up. Irene is breathily belting out torch songs when Johnson and another cop arrive at the club. A reporter, Dave Ames, Robert Hutton, is trying to tip the bar manager, Herb Vigran, for an introduction to Irene. Johnson sees Dave, and they are old war buddies. Dave has a thing for Irene, and she's working him from the stage. Johnson finds out from the bar manager that Joe is in the dressing room. Johnson and Dave go back and for some reason leave the other cop behind. Johnson sees Joe's car in the alley. Irene is having a good time with Joe. Johnson and Dave watch as the pair exit to where the car is parked. Johnson tells Joe that the car is stolen and arrests him. Joe is also charged with carrying a concealed weapon. Joe is cocky and says Nick will have him and her out in 10 minutes. Irene has to walk to the police station. Dave tags along to protect her. She is pretty hostile until she realizes how big a fan Dave is. Two hoods drop Nick at the back door of the Paradise Club. The bar manager lets Nick know that Joe has been arrested. Nick finds out that Irene is walking and calls her a Tommy. According to Eddie Muller's outro for this film, it means tomboy or a manly woman. Nick goes after Irene. Dave tells that Johnson was his sergeant in the Marines. The hoods and Nick catch up to Irene, but when one of the boys doesn't want to attack the couple in McQueen's precinct, Nick beats the man and places him in the back of the car. At the police station, Irene tells Dave he has no shot at romance with her. McQueen tells Joe he is being charged with grand theft and gun possession. He then tells Irene that she must testify against Joe. She says no way. Dave is another witness. McQueen has Irene detained as a material witness. Joe calls a bonding company instead of his brother. McQueen thinks they don't want to use a writ to get the two out of jail because it is too public and too near the election. He then asks Dave to write a story with McQueen's name featured prominently. Since he knows McQueen is setting himself up as a target, Johnson asks Dave to add his name to the story. McQueen goes to see Judge Sherman. He makes it back to the station in the morning. Judge Sherman, a legitimate judge, has agreed to hear the case against Joe. No sooner does he get inside than Walsh runs up with a newspaper asking how McQueen could do this to him. Welch says the car's owner won't press charges and a permit for Joe's gun can be issued. Welch lets out that the old man is connected to Nick. Turk comes in and tells Welch that Conley wants to see him. Welch looks like a deer in headlights. Dave comes in and has been threatened with being fired from the paper. McQueen calls Irene down to meet with Dave. Conley blames Welch for not being available when Joe was arrested and says he might be out of the election. Welch wants to see the old man. Conley refuses, and Welch asks if they still need Nick. Nick comes in the back, and here's what is said. Nick says Johnson won't testify at the trial, and Irene will be convicted for grand theft auto and sent to prison. Conley says the old man will not like the killing of Officer Johnson. Welsh runs away to do Nick's bidding. Davis brings in a writ, and Nick puts the date on it to get Joe out of jail. At first, Joe barks about leaving Irene in jail. Irene gets irate that she is being left behind and is blamed for the car theft. She says she will tell everything, including about the murder of Higgins. Welsh comes inside and hears Irene say that she will testify. McQueek says he wants to arrest Nick. He convinces Irene to testify, and she finally realizes her life is in danger. McQueek plans to have Joe picked up again. At his home, Johnson sees his name in the paper. He rushes Lucy off to the doctor in case he is attacked at home. Johnson secures his home and waits with his gun for the expected attack. Dave shows up and asks about getting Irene released. While they are waiting, two hoods arrive by car. Dave lets Durko and the other man inside. The hoods pull guns as Dave leads them to the bedroom. Johnson calls out from his hiding place for the two hoods to freeze. Johnson and the two hoods get into a shootout. Johnson kills them both. Turk, Connolly, and Nick are in the Acme office and have Welsh on the phone. Welsh is spilling all of the info about Irene, telling the cops about Higgins. Connolly wants to handle the problem and asks Nick to let someone else handle the girl. Welsh comes into McQueek's office and gets the captain to leave for coffee, as ordered by Nick. Welsh asks to have Johnson sent away for protection. When Nick arrives demanding to see Irene, Johnson is at the front desk. He thinks Nick is a regular hood and insults the gangster. When Nick realizes he is talking to Johnson, they fight. Nick shoots Johnson. Dave sees the murder happen as he enters the room. Nick pistol whips Dave and escapes. McQueek returns in time to see the getaway car. He puts out a flash bulletin for the car, and it is not long until Nick is arrested. At the police station, Johnson dies. McQueek says a few good words about Johnson. Irene is tending to the injured Dave. Lucy walks into the station and hears that a cop has been killed. She knows it is her husband before she is told. Connolly and Welsh meet about the murder. Connolly says the main thing is that Nick not be allowed to confess. Mary comes and takes Lucy home. Welsh and Turk arrive at the station to help Nick. Nick is brought in by the patrol officers. He has dumped the murder weapon. Nick blames his driver for the killing. Davis comes in with a writ of habeas corpus. McQueek rips the writ up. When Davis goes to get Walsh, the desk sergeant first trips him and then arrests him for being drunk and disorderly and resisting arrest. McQueek has Nick booked for murder. They exchange punches. Welsh and Turk come in with a torn-up writ. McQueek has Nick brought down. Dave and Irene are in the next room and both agree to testify as Irene has had a change of heart. Dave identifies Nick as Johnson's murderer. Irene insults Nick to his face, saying his brother always apologized for him. Irene slaps Nick and he lets slip that he beat Dave. Welsh knows they are sunk. Just then, an officer comes in with Nick's gun, with Nick's fingerprints all over it. Nick is left alone in the office with a guard outside the door. Welsh is on the phone with the old man. He is instructed to tell Nick that he must remain in jail until after the election. Welsh is scared to tell Nick. Finally, with McQueek, Turk, and Nick in the office, Welsh tells Nick that he has to stay in jail. McQueek leaves the office. Nick says he will bring everyone down by talking to the crime commission. He says he will turn in Conley, the old man, and the big guys in New York. Turk opens the window for Nick to escape. McQueek comes back in, and Nick grabs the murder weapon. McQueek faces him down, and Nick pulls the trigger. The gun is empty. Turk fires his gun and kills Nick. McQueek didn't know the gun was unloaded, but he did have a cop outside the window. McQueek tells Welsh that he planned everything. Turk says the gangsters always go too far. Dave runs Irene down, and they agree to give love a try. Harry Craig from the Crime Commission arrives with subpoenas for Welsh and Turk. McQueek talks to the desk sergeant, saying it has been a long day and tomorrow will be the same. Mary is waiting for him in the car. Conclusion. This was Robert Mitchum's first film following his pot arrest on August 31st, 1948. Was it just chance that his first role back was that of a super crime fighter? As I mentioned in the intro, this film was produced by reclusive millionaire Howard Hughes and directed by John Cromwell. However, IMDb.com has 4 uncredited directors: Mel Ferrer, Tay Garnett, Nicholas Ray, and Sherman Todd. This resulted from Howard Hughes' inability to leave finished films alone. My favorite film noir scriptwriter, Sam Fuller, was hired as a contract writer for today's film. However, his script was rejected because Captain McQueek was just as bad as Nick Scanlon. Of course, I love Perry Mason, especially the Raymond Burr series from 1957 to 1962. For most of the run, Ray Collins and William Talman were primary characters. However, they were cast slightly different than in this film. Ray Collins went from a crooked judge to the ever-dependable Lieutenant Arthur Tragg. William Talman went from beat cop to District Attorney Hamilton Berger. World-famous short summary: good cop keeps his eyes on the prize. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review where you get your podcast or watch YouTube. It really helps the show get found. As a technical note, references and citation are listed for each show on the site at classicmovierev.com. Beware the Moors. 2 boxes in a circle are going to pop up here. The first box is for a recommended movie for you. The second one is a playlist related to today's film. The circle, you can subscribe to the channel to get notification and all the other stuff.